morning wore a disguise of peace. Gentle sky, sun-warmed earth, wind threading softly through tall pines. Marcus Langston, immaculately dressed, guided his 6-year-old daughter Ayla in her wheelchair down a secluded bluff trail. "It's a special day," he murmured. But Ayla felt it something cold beneath his voice. "Daddy, why are we here?" she asked, her hands trembling. He didn't answer, just a sudden, heartless shove. Her scream vanished into the canyon. Marcus turned and walked away, but someone else saw it all. Brisket, her loyal dog, had just witnessed the unthinkable, and what he would do next would change everything. If this story is already pulling at your heart, go ahead and like the video, subscribe for more, and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The evening sun melted over the Louisiana horizon, painting the sky in deep honey and bruised purple. Pine trees lined the narrow road like guards of memory, their shadows stretching across the asphalt like long-forgotten hands. Marcus Langston drove in silence, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting motionless on his knee. His pressed navy suit was pristine, tie perfectly knotted, shoes polished to a lawyer's glare. From the back seat came soft humming, a lullaby, broken in rhythm but not in spirit. Ayla, 6 years old, sat in her wheelchair, fingers curled in the fabric of her lavender dress, wide brown eyes fixed on the shifting colors outside her window. Her hair was tied in twin puffs, and a small ruffled backpack sat beside her. Next to her, Brisket, the family's black and tan German shepherd, lay with his head alert, brown eyes scanning the road ahead, ears twitching like miniature radar dishes. "We're worth heading to the hospital today," that much Marcus had made clear. "We're going to see something special," he'd told Ayla that morning, his voice tight with something she couldn't name. She hadn't asked more. Children like Ayla's children, who'd spent more days in therapy rooms than playgrounds, learned to read silence. And today, her father's silence sounded like stone. Brisket sat up straighter when the car turned off the main highway. The paved road gave way to gravel, and the rumbling beneath the tires grew louder, more erratic. The dog's ears lifted, nose twitching. Then he whined, soft at first, barely audible. Marcus ignored it, eyes fixed forward. The sun was beginning its descent now, haloing the distant tree line in gold. "You're almost there," Marcus murmured. His fingers flexed on the wheel. Ayla turned to him. "Is it the place you told me about?" Her voice carried hope, but it fluttered like a bird caught in the wind. Marcus didn't answer right away. He reached for the rearview mirror, adjusted it slightly to catch her eyes. "Yes, pumpkin," he said, forcing a smile. "The overlook. Remember, I said one day I'd show you." Brisket stood in the back seat. He barked once, sharp, insistent. Then again, Marcus's jaw twitched. "Sit," he ordered, but Brisket didn't. His eyes had fixed on the narrowing path ahead, the cliff road known only to locals, a place of whispering pines and quiet rumors. "Daddy," Ayla whispered, "Brisket doesn't like it here." Marcus pulled the car over and cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He stepped out, his movements precise, practiced. He opened the back door, unbuckled Ayla gently, lifting her from the seat like something precious but fragile. Her wheelchair was already in the trunk. He unfolded it with ease, placed her in a net, and began pushing without a word. The crunch of gravel underfoot matched the distant caw of a crow overhead. The path wound through a dense wall of trees, opening after 10 minutes into a clearing that bled into the cliff's edge. Below, the world rolled out in an endless patchwork of woods and winding rivers, swallowed slowly by dusk. Brisket lagged behind at first, sniffing, pawing at invisible things. Then he froze, rigid, hackles raised. He took 2 steps forward, planting himself between Marcus and Ayla's wheelchair. Marcus exhaled heavily, low and controlled. "Brisket," he said, "heel." But Brisket didn't move. His eyes darted from Marcus to the edge of the cliff. He growled low, deep in his chest. Ayla reached out, placing her hand gently on the dog's fur. "It's okay, Brisket, Daddy's just showing me the view." But Brisket growled louder, stepping sideways to shield her from the edge. The sun touched the trees now, the sky burned orange. Marcus stared into the horizon. His face, once warm and open, hardened into a mask, flat, unreadable. "You know," he said after a long pause, voice barely audible, "your mother used to love this place." Ayla tilted her head, I don't remember, Daddy. He nodded slowly. No, you were too young. He looked down at his polished shoes, then back at the horizon. She said it made her feel free. Brisket barked again. It was short, but this time the air around them changed. Even the birds fell silent. Marcus turned to Isla, knelt down so he was at her eye level. He touched her cheek. His fingers lingered just a second too long. Do you trust me? Isla nodded, but it came slow, hesitant. Behind them, Brisket growled again, circling toward her side. He pressed his body against her wheelchair. Marcus stood, wiped invisible dust from his suit sleeve, and forced another smile. Then don't be afraid. He stepped behind the wheelchair. Brisket growled so fiercely now that Isla's small hands clenched the armrests. Daddy? She asked, a tremble in her voice. Why is Brisket scared? Marcus said nothing. The sun was half gone now, bleeding into the earth. His hands gripped the handles of the chair. Brisket lunged forward, barking like an explosion. Marcus jerked back, startled. The moment broke, a breathless second passed, then another. He stepped away from the chair, hands raised. Okay, he muttered, voice cracking. Okay, I was just, never mind. He crouched beside Ayla, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. Let's go home. Brisket stood between them, not barking now, but his body coiled tight, as if waiting for the lie to slip again. The wind began to change as the sun slipped behind the trees, casting jagged shadows across the cliffside clearing. Ayla blinked against the last light, her small hands resting motionless on her lap as she tilted her head up to look at her father. Daddy, she asked, voice thin and fragile, like a thread about to snap. Marcus Langston didn't answer at first. He stood behind the wheelchair, hands tight on the grips, eyes locked on the horizon as if searching for something just beyond reach, redemption, perhaps, or the strength to go through with what had been building inside him for months. Brisket, standing a few feet away, had stopped barking but hadn't relaxed. His head was low, shoulders tense, tail stiff behind him. The growl that rumbled through his throat was nearly inaudible, but the tension in his body radiated like static electricity. Ayla felt it too. She shifted slightly in her chair, one hand gripping the armrest tighter. Are we going to stay here long? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus finally moved. Slowly, he leaned in toward her, placing both hands on her small shoulders, and whispered, You were always too good for this broken world. His voice was soft, tender even, but hollow like a song sung from behind a locked door. Before Isla could respond, before she could even register the words, Marcus stepped behind her again. His hands gripped the wheelchair firmly, and in one sudden violent motion, he shoved it forward. The chair jolted toward the edge with a screech of metal against gravel. Ayla's scream pierced the air, raw, confused, terrified, just as the front wheels left the ground. The chair careened off the edge, tumbling into the vast emptiness beyond. For a moment, the only sound was the rustling wind. Then Brisket erupted. His bark was no longer a warning but a scream of anguish. He charged toward the cliff's edge, muscles straining, but Marcus was faster. He turned, yanked Brisket back by the collar mid-lunge, and dragged him toward a wooden fence post near the clearing. You're... Marcus hissed through clenched teeth. You're staying here. Brisket fought him, snarling, snapping, but Marcus was prepared. From his coat pocket, he pulled a reinforced leash with a quick carabiner and looped it tight around the fence post, locking it in place. Brisket howled, yanked, jerked his entire body forward, claws digging into the dirt. But the leash held. Marcus stood over him, breathing heavily, one hand trembling slightly before he shoved it back into his pocket. It's done, he muttered to himself. No witnesses. He turned away without a second glance, walking back to the car parked in the shadows. The SUV started with a low rumble, headlights slicing through the gathering darkness. Brisket's eyes followed the vehicle as it reversed down the gravel path, then disappeared into the trees, taillights blinking like dying on his neck, just beneath his collar. A small black device with a blinking red light remained unnoticed, a GoPro Nano, part of his advanced training rig, originally used for search and rescue simulations. Earlier that week, Ayla had begged Marcus not to disable it. It helps Brisket learn better, she'd said, and Marcus, distracted and distant, had waved her off without checking. What he didn't realize was that the device had been live recording for the last 15 minutes. Its cloud sync feature auto-uploading to a secure folder on Ayla's private account. One that her late mother had set up before passing a digital diary of sorts, filled with therapy sessions, voice memos, and recently Brisket's footage. As the wind howled across the bluff and Brisket sat trembling in the dark, the footage continued uploading in high resolution. Down below, a miracle had occurred. Ayla's fall, though brutal, had not ended in death. Her wheelchair struck a jagged outcrop, flipped, and wedged sideways between two gnarled branches from a tree that clung desperately to the cliffside wall. She dangled there now, unconscious, blood trickling from a scrape on her forehead, legs still strapped into the seat. A soft creaking groan came from the chair's frame with every gust of wind. She was still breathing, but barely. Above, Brisket whined, ears scanning the vertical drop, sensing her presence but not seeing. He pawed the dirt, barked again, then sat still, head lifted to the sky like a soldier holding vigil. The sky had turned from orange to deep purple now, stars blinking one by one. In the distance, an owl called. Somewhere nearby, a twig cracked. Brisket's ears perked again, alert, not afraid. Something in him shifted, not just instinct, but memory. The routines, the drills, the scent retrievals. He lowered his nose to the earth, sniffed hard, and let out a single mournful bark. The leash groaned. Somewhere inside the house of Marcus Langston, over 40 miles away, a laptop screen lit up. A cloud folder auto-opened in the background. Title: Brisket Cam Sync Enabled. Upload complete. 6min 47 sec. The cursor blinked. Nobody saw it yet, but it was there, waiting. The air was colder down the cliffside, the kind of cold that clung to skin and slipped between bones. Darkness had claimed the bluff, and moonlight now traced silver outlines over jagged stone. Somewhere midway down the vertical face, a battered wheelchair creaked and shifted slightly with every gust of wind, suspended precariously by two branches thick with moss and old bark. Ayla's small frame remained strapped into the seat, her head slumped forward, a thin line of blood crusted at her temple. Her hands dangled loosely by her sides, fingers twitching now and then, more from muscle memory than awareness. She was alive, barely. One of her pink sneakers had fallen off, landing 50 feet below on a flat rock shelf dusted in leaves. Every time the wind shook the tree, the chair shifted, the branches groaned under the unfamiliar weight, and the metal frame let out a long, soft squeal, as if complaining to the night. Strapped to Ayla's left wrist, half hidden beneath her sleeve, a small white medical smartwatch continued blinking, its screen cracked but still functional. It pulsed every 5 seconds, emitting a faint signal, far weaker than usual but persistent. The device, custom assigned for pediatric neuro patients, featured heart rate tracking, temperature sensors, and, most critically, a location beacon synced to a caregiver's app, Brisket's handler software. Normally, this data uploaded to Marcus's personal device, but after a configuration reset made by Ayla's physical therapist weeks earlier, the app had been mirrored to Brisket's smart harness module. And that small redundancy, unnoticed by Marcus, had now become the only thread tying her to the outside world. At the top of the bluff, Brisket lay curled tightly against the base of the fence post, his body trembling from a mix of exertion, stress, and the sting of betrayal. His leash had tangled during his repeated lunges, binding his front leg awkwardly. Still, he stayed alert, nose twitching at every scent change, eyes searching the dark edge of the cliff. Then, without warning, the smart sensor strapped beneath his collar vibrated once, then twice, alerting to antibody for safety. A subtle sound emitted from the module, a soft ping, followed by a pulsing green LED. Brisket raised his head instantly. He knew that tone. It was part of his training, associated with recovery drills and medical emergencies. He let out a sharp bark, urgent but precise. Miles away, in a small cabin nestled near the backside of the Montgomery Forest Reserve, Ezekiel Thomas, retired ranger, ex-specialist in Army Recon, and unofficial watchdog of the area, was finishing his second cup of black coffee. His radio sat silent on the windowsill, and a weathered laptop blinked beside it, showing a routine satellite sweep of the trail systems. Ezekiel's eyes, worn by years of watching wilderness turn to silence, caught a flicker on his backup monitor. A custom-aided GPS relay had lit up, sourced from a secondary beacon labeled Unit BR-SKT-1. Brisket. Ezekiel leaned forward, frowning. He hadn't received a signal from that tag in over a year, not since Marcus had ended their contract for field training. But here it was again, blinking faintly from a latitude near Ridgepoint Bluff. The altitude reading, however, made him pause. It hovered at an impossible height mid-air between ground and canyon floor. He tapped the console, zoomed in. Then he stood, moving with a purpose sharpened by instinct. He'd seen weird things in his years in the military, but never a signal floating in empty space. Back at the cliff, Brisket had begun pulling again, claws scraping dirt, eyes locked toward the edge. The pinging repeated, fainter this time. His ears twitched. Somewhere far below, Ayla stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. The wind blew dust into her face and she coughed once. Weakly, the movement caused the chair to tilt dangerously, shifting weight from one branch to another. A loud crack echoed against the cliff face. Brisket barked again, louder, sharper, then whined. He could feel her, smell her, not dead, not gone. Ezekiel had pulled on his boots and jacket in under a minute. He grabbed his old field bag from the corner. The canvas faded and patched in places, but packed with gear that could still save a life. His hands moved fast like rope, robo blanket, flashlight, portable GPS, then paused. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a laminated card labeled Ayla Med Alert. It had been part of an old training module when Brisket and Ayla had first started search and assist drills with him. He stared at it for a moment, something heavy settling in his chest. "It's that," he whispered, already moving toward the door. As the minutes passed, the air thinned. Ayla drifted between awareness and unconsciousness, the pain in her side a dull throb. Her breath fogged in the cold, her lips dry and cracked. She whispered something, a word half. Brisket's harness began to emit a steady tone now, signaling critical threshold. The dog howled once, a deep, guttural sound that tore through the forest silence. In the distance, a deer startled. Somewhere overhead, clouds began to gather, heavy and slow. A storm was building. Ezekiel, now on his ATV, powered through the narrow fire road leading toward the bluff. The GPS mounted on the handlebar guided him, but he didn't need it. He knew the terrain. He had once rappelled this very cliff during a fire rescue back in 2004. What he didn't know yet was what waited for him wedged in that impossible space between gravity and grace. At the edge of the bluff, Brisket tugged harder, the collar biting into his neck. Then, by pure instinct or desperation, he pivoted sharply, leaned his body weight to the left, and twisted his body under the tension. The carabiner clicked against the post once, twice, and then snapped free. The leash tore loose. Brisket stumbled forward, caught himself, and raced full speed toward the cliff's edge, stopping just short. He stood there, panting, nose pointed downward, barking wildly. His tail whipped through the air. Below, Ayla's chair shifted again, metal shrieking. One branch cracked completely, dropping the chair lower, now held by a single arm of twisted bark. Ezekiel was still 5 minutes out. The wind picked up, thunder echoed faintly, and Ayla's hand moved. The front door of the Langston estate creaked open just after midnight, the house dimly lit by the flicker of a single wall sconce in the foyer. Rain had begun to fall, soft, hesitant drops that patted the roof like uncertain footsteps. Marcus entered quietly, brushing off his shoulders with slow, deliberate movements. His suit was rumpled now, tie askew, and though his face wore a carefully arranged mask of calm, a thin line of sweat clung to his brow. He paused at the threshold, hand gripping the polished banister for just a second longer than necessary, before stepping inside and closing the door with a soft click behind him. Leona stood at the base of the stairs, barefoot, robe cinched tightly at the waist. Her eyes scanned him with practiced suspicion, but her voice was light, breezy. "You're late." Marcus offered a vague smile, leaning forward to kiss her cheek, which she subtly tilted away. "Therapy center called," he said smoothly. "Last-minute opening in Baton Rouge. They've got a new neuromuscular program, experimental. Only 2 slots statewide. I didn't want to risk missing it." Leona blinked, surprised not by the news but by the specificity. "You drove all the way there tonight?" She's admitted already. Intake was quick. They needed the Guardian's signature, so I took care of it." He stepped into the kitchen, opened a bottle of mineral water from the fridge, and drank half of it in one go. "It's residential," he added, voice muffled. "She'll be there for a while." Leona followed him, arms crossed. "How long is a while?" Marcus exhaled slowly, pretending to think. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. Could be longer. Depends on how she responds." Silence stretched between them. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant sky. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Leona asked, feigning curiosity. "It all happened so fast." Marcus placed the bottle down gently, careful not to leave condensation on the counter. "He didn't want to wake you, right?" In the corner, Brisket lay curled in his designated bed by the fireplace. But he didn't sleep. His ears were perked, his eyes fixed on Marcus's every movement. His fur, usually sleek, was matted from earlier rain and restless pacing. Marcus glanced at the dog, then back to Leona. "You should get some rest. I need to update a few documents." He left her standing there and disappeared into his office, closing the door with a firm but quiet finality. Inside, he locked it. Brisket rose to his feet the moment the latch clicked. He padded slowly toward the hallway, then stopped in front of Marcus's office door and sat rigid, unmoving. He stared at the frame for a long moment, then let out a low growl, deep and guttural. In the office, Marcus powered on his laptop, opened a secured folder, and scanned through a set of prepared documents. One of them bore the header, "Langston Trust Reallocation Contingency Addendum." He clicked through the pages quickly, barely reading them. It had all been set up months ago, just waiting for the right moment. He checked the time, 9:53 p.m. He opened the voice notes app on his phone, scrolled to a recording labeled 10 p.m. He played it once, adjusted the audio file's metadata, and timestamped it for secure storage. Then he clicked save. Outside the door, Brisket stood and began pacing. His nails clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor. At exactly 10 o'clock p.m. he stopped, raised his head, and barked. Once, loud. Marcus flinched. Brisket barked again. Leona, upstairs, stirred. "Marcus?" she called. Marcus silenced his phone, unplugged the hard drive, and stuffed it into his desk drawer. He opened a file folder labeled Power of Attorney Langston Holdings and removed a set of pre-illed documents. The next morning, over breakfast, he placed them on the kitchen island while Leona sliced fruit. "What's this?" she asked. "A temporary transfer," Marcus said casually, pouring himself coffee. "If anything happens during Ayla's treatment, emergency authorizations, account decisions, I need you to be able to act on behalf of the family." Leona looked at him over the rim of her glass. "Why not just do it yourself?" "Because I'll be in and out of travel. They're putting me on some oversight board at work. High-level stuff. Could be tied up in meetings for days." She picked up the pen without question, signing where he indicated. Marcus smiled to himself. That night, Brisket refused to eat. He sniffed the bowl once, then turned away, laying down again in front of Marcus's office door. At exactly 10 o'clock p.m. he barked. Twice. Leona noticed. "Is he trained to do that?" Marcus looked up from his tablet, expression unreadable. "Old habit. Left over from search drills. He didn't do that before. Must have remembered something." Leona said nothing more, but her gaze lingered on the dog. By the third night, Brisket had stopped barking at dinner, stopped responding to commands, and refused to leave the hallway outside Marcus's door. He stood watch like a statue, and each night at 10 o'clock p.m., without fail, he barked. Just once. One sharp, echoing reminder that someone was missing, something that only he still remembered. Ezekiel Thomas rose with the sun, as he always did, his body wired for discipline that had long outlived his military career. The kettle hissed on the stove while the morning mist coiled between pine trunks outside his cabin window. The same routine, day after day, until this morning. It began with the barking. Not just any barking, but a sharp, specific pattern. One bark, silence, another bark at 10 It was the sound that had once meant found target during search and rescue drills. He recognized the cadence even after all these years. When he stepped onto the porch, thermos in hand, the sound echoed again from somewhere beyond the East Ridge Trail. He didn't see the dog yet, but he felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. The last time he heard that bark was during a joint exercise involving a particular shepherd pup with sharp eyes and a near-perfect retrieval record, Brisket. A few minutes later, as he walked toward the outer enclosure near his unused training lot, he spotted the dog through the clearing, fur-soaked, pacing in rigid lines. Brisket had broken loose but not run wild. Instead, he moved with purpose, his body tight and ears fixed in one direction. Ezekiel whistled low. Brisket stopped, head snapping toward him, then barked once, short and urgent. Ezekiel took a step closer. "Easy boy, what the hell you doing all the way out here?" he murmured. Brisket responded by charging forward, grabbing Ezekiel's sleeve with his mouth not biting, just tugging, then racing off a few steps, stopping, looking back. Classic guide behavior. Ezekiel narrowed his eyes, suddenly very awake. He followed. Brisket led him not toward town but deep into the overgrown section of the ridge, one Ezekiel rarely patrolled since his official retirement. 30 minutes in, the dog stopped at a split in the trail, pawed the dirt aggressively, then sat, panting hard. There was no clear sign of anything, just trees, brush. Then Brisket did something Ezekiel hadn't seen in years. He bumped his shoulder deliberately against Ezekiel's left hip, where the man used to carry a fill tablet synced to canine gear. The old ranger blinked. "You still rigged up?" he asked, crouching beside the dog. Under the collar he found it still there, though faded and scraped, the smart tag blinking faintly. Ezekiel pulled out his phone, accessed the old K9 Sync app he hadn't touched since his training days, and, to his surprise, the signal connected. A screen loaded slow, shaky, but real-time. The interface hadn't changed much. He tapped to expand the device dashboard and saw 2 data threads, BR-SCAP-1 and a paired auxiliary beacon, AL-309. Ayla. His throat tightened slightly. He remembered the girl, fragile but fierce, always trying to outmaneuver Brisket during hide-and-seek drills behind his cabin. His fingers flew across the screen. The GPS was weak, but the data was clear. The last known location of the paired device had been transmitted 9 hours ago from a point just off Ridgepoint Bluff, altitude 196 feet above the canyon floor. Impossible for someone to just be floating. Ezekiel rose, heart pounding. He opened his backpack, pulled out his drone controller, and launched his old Mavic from a small gravel patch nearby. It soared up, then veered west. On the phone screen, he monitored the live feed as the drone approached the coordinates. The bluff came into view, jagged rock, thick trees, and then, just as the data had shown, the camera caught it. A strange line in the dirt, almost like tire tracks, leading straight to the cliff's edge. He zoomed in. The tracks ended abruptly. No footprints back, no signs of return. Just a scuffed brake line and the faint indentation of something heavy, possibly a wheelchair. Ezekiel swallowed hard. Brisket barked beside him, more frantic now, pacing in circles. The pieces didn't just add up. They screamed. He snapped the drone back to hover mode, saved the stills to internal storage, and clipped his phone back to his belt. His voice was low but fierce. "What did he do, boy?" he whispered. "What did Marcus do?" Back at the estate, Marcus paced his office, watching the rain hit the window. The recording from earlier still echoed in his mind. "She's gone. It's done." His plan had felt airtight, seamless. Brisket's leash had broken, yes, but the dog couldn't talk. No one would believe a hunch. No one had access to the synced beacon. At least, that's what he thought. But at that very moment, Ezekiel stood on the edge of Ridgepoint Bluff, eyes scanning the horizon. Brisket barked again, nose to the dirt. The old soldier knelt, ran gloved fingers across the grooves. He'd tracked men through jungles, insurgents through desert plains, and once even found a lost hiker with only a scrap of torn denim as a clue. These weren't just marks. They were desperation carved into earth. He stood and pulled out his radio. "Maya, it's Zeke. I'm calling in that favor you owe me. Pack your gear. We've got a child on the side of a damn cliff." He didn't wait for a response. He stared over the edge as lightning cracked far in the distance. And below, far below, something shifted among the shadows of stone and branch. The sky cracked open in a violent flash as Ezekiel's truck skidded to a stop near the tree line, headlights bouncing off wet underbrush and slick roots. The storm had moved in fast, brutal and loud, battering the old pine canopy with sheets of rain and wind that howled through branches like warning cries from the past. Brisket sat in the passenger seat, soaked to the skin but eerily still. Ears alert, tail-spack eyes trained on the trailhead ahead like a soldier waiting for a call to charge. Ezekiel shut off the engine and leaned into the back seat, grabbing the coiled rope, harness packs, and a waterproof case containing his first aid gear, all prepared in the hours since the drone footage had confirmed the impossible. Isla was out there, somewhere between heaven and stone. Just as he shouldered his pack, headlights approached from behind and a second vehicle pulled into the clearing. The door flew open, and out stepped Maya Vega, lean, sharp-eyed, her curly hair already soaked under the hood of her storm jacket, climbing bag slung over one shoulder. "You weren't kidding," she said, voice rising above the wind as she marched toward him. "Those drone stills look bad." Ezekiel tossed her a bundle of carbineers and a secondary harness. "Get a window of maybe 45 minutes before this storm buries the bluff. We don't move now, she doesn't make it." Maya nodded once, no time for questions. She pulled the headlamp from her collar and strapped it down. "Dog's coming with us?" she asked. "He found her first," Ezekiel said simply. "I'd trust him over Brisket jumped down without waiting for instruction, landing in a puddle and immediately trotting ahead toward the narrow trail. Rain lashed the side of the bluff, wind threatening to shove anything unrooted straight into the abyss. But the dog moved with purpose, each paw landing with instinctive calculation, every glance backward a silent command to follow. The three of them pushed through the underbrush, shoes sinking into mud, lightning cracking above like a war drum, trees groaning in protest around them. When they reached the overlook, the world dropped away beneath them into a black ocean of mist and shadow. Maya clipped into the anchor point Ezekiel had driven deep into the rocks years ago, an old bolt used for military rappelling drills, and tested its strength with a sharp yank. "It'll hold," she said, breath fogging. "I'll go first." Ezekiel scanned the edge. "She was here," he confirmed, pointing at the faint wheelchair grooves, now blurred by water but still visible. Brisket didn't wait. He padded straight to the cliff's lip and lay down flat, whining, tail curled under his legs, nose pressed to the wet stone. Then he looked up at Maya and let out a sound that didn't quite qualify as a bark, more like a cry caught in his throat. She lowered her headlamp, beam slicing through the curtain of rain, and aimed it down the cliff face. For a second there was nothing, just storm-washed stone and a dizzying drop. Then the light caught something metal glinting dully, wrapped in torn fabric and branches. Maya narrowed the beam, her heart clenched. "I see her," she said, voice tight. She's stuck midway down, chairs wedged but barely, one branch supporting it. Any more weight shift and she's gone. Ezekiel knelt beside Brisket, rubbing the dog's soaked fur. "You did good, boy. Stay here." Brisket didn't move, eyes locked downward. Maya double-checked her clips, set her brake line, and began her descent, boots searching for holds, rope singing against the anchor as she inched downward through wind that clawed at her coat and threatened to spin her off balance. Her breath came in sharp bursts, controlled and even. She reached the halfway mark, boots slipping once, catching herself with a grunt. Then her light found Ayla's face, pale, blood-stained but unmistakably alive. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady, lips parted slightly as if whispering to some invisible companion. Maya called up, "She's breathing. Pulse looks low, but she's alive." The wind screamed in reply. Ezekiel yelled down, "Stabilize the chair before you touch her." Maya nodded to no one, shifting her weight carefully onto a side brace, reaching for the trunk of the branch that held the chair. She tested it, bark peeling under her gloves, then quickly secured a secondary rope around its base. The metal frame groaned, shifting an inch, and Ayla stirred, moaning softly, her head lolled to the side, eyes fluttering open. "Mommy?" she whispered, voice barely audible. Maya blinked away the rain in her eyes. "No, sweetie, but I'm here. We're getting you home." Above, Brisket let out another bark, more urgent now, pacing the edge as if begging them to move faster. Ezekiel set up the pulley system, clipping the second line into a stabilizer and prepping the counterweight. His hands, though weathered, moved like they had in Kandahar, calm, precise, fast. "Rig's ready," he shouted. "Start the lift on my count." Maya secured Ayla's harness, talking to her the entire time, low and gentle, voice barely rising above the wind but grounding them both in something human. She wrapped the girl tightly, checked the straps, and signaled. Ready? Ezekiel dug in his heels, threw his weight against the line, and began the pull. The rope jerked, groaned, then moved smoothly, inch by inch. Lightning struck a tree nearby, the flash so bright it painted the bluff in white for a heartbeat. Bruschetta didn't flinch. He stood there, tail high, muscles taut, barking at the storm as if daring it to interfere. The wind whipped harder now, trying to rip everything away, but the lift continued. Ayla's limp form rose steadily, guided by Maya from below and Ezekiel's strength from above. 10 feet, 5, 3, and then her small body crested the edge of the bluff. Ezekiel dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms, cradling her against his chest, rain soaking them both. Brisket lunged forward, licking her face, whining, pressing his head into her shoulder. Ayla stirred, eyes barely open. Brisket. The morning after the storm broke over Ridgepoint Bluff, the Langston estate looked as pristine as ever from the outside. But inside its walls, shadows lengthened and truths began to unravel. Brisket, now dry and fed, lay curled beside Ayla's bed in the recovery room of the regional medical center, never letting her out of his sight. Ezekiel stood nearby, arms crossed, watching monitors beep faintly as the girl's breathing stabilized. Maya had returned to her truck to rest, but Ezekiel's mind wasn't resting. His thoughts ran a straight line from the storm-washed cliff to the calm malice behind Marcus Langston's eyes. And now, it was time to take the next step. He reached into his pack and withdrew the GoPro module from Brisket's collar, scratched but intact. With the indicator light blinking green, he plugged it into his tablet, opened the archive folder, and scrubbed through the timeline until he hit the moment Ayla's voice asking, "Daddy," followed by Marcus's heavy silence, then the cruel push, the chair rolling forward, the scream. He watched the footage once, then again, each time his jaw clenched tight. He copied the video to a secure drive and encrypted it with a 2-factor lock. He didn't trust just anyone with this, but he knew one person who would know what to do. 20 miles away, in a small converted garage office lit by neon signs and buzzing monitors, Camille Voss, a firebrand independent journalist known for breaking the unbreakable, sat hunched over a laptop editing footage from a recent protest, when her phone buzzed with a single message. From Zeke, secure. You'll want to see this. Attached was the file, no subject, no explanation. Camille's brow furrowed. She clicked the link and leaned back slowly as the video began to play. She didn't blink until it ended. She called him instantly. "Where is the girl now?" "Alive," Ezekiel said. "Recovering, but we need this out, carefully." Camille's voice hardened. "How deep does it go?" Ezekiel glanced at Ayla, then at Brisket, who lifted his head and let out a low huff. Deep enough that the girl was erased on paper before she even went missing. Meanwhile, at the Langston estate, Marcus sat in his home office behind drawn curtains, sipping whiskey in a tailored robe, reviewing asset spreadsheets and offshore wire drafts with mechanical detachment. The illusion of control held for now, but downstairs Leona moved with a different energy. She wore heels, but they tapped the floor faster than usual. Her hands trembled as she sorted through files hidden beneath a false drawer in Marcus's locked cabinet, using a key she had copied weeks ago out of idle curiosity, now driven by fear. She pulled out a file labeled Beneficiary Revocation, Langston Trust. Scanning the fine print and seeing Ayla's name crossed out in thick black ink, her fingers tightened around the edge. That's when she heard footsteps. Maria, the longtime housekeeper, coming in through the back hall with the breakfast tray. Leona slammed the drawer shut and grabbed the nearby fireplace lighter. Without hesitation, she stuffed the documents into the cast-iron stove and lit them. Flames roared as legal jargon curled and blackened. But Maria had seen enough. She entered just in time to see Leona step away from the stove, lips tight, a strange gleam in her eye. "What was that?" Maria asked, voice steady. "Just clutter," Leona replied. "Old drafts Marcus doesn't need." Maria stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "That looked like a will." Leona's lips twitched. "You know better than to ask questions." Maria said nothing but left the room slower than she'd entered, eyes catching the edge of a singed paper floating down inside the stove. Later, when she returned with the vacuum, she waited until Leona was upstairs. She knelt by the ash drawer, pulled it open gently, and sifted through the debris until she found it, a half-burnt fragment still legible. It read, Upon reaching age 18, the entirety of the Langston estate shall pass to the sole natural heir, Ayla. Maria stood frozen, breath caught in her chest. She knew this girl. Sweet, delicate Ayla. She had braided her hair, fed her soup when she was sick, and sang her lullabies when Marcus and Leona were too busy hosting guests. The thought of that child being cut from everything erased sent a chill through her bones. She tucked the fragment into her apron pocket and turned away quickly. That evening, Maria made a quiet call to an old friend in records at the local courthouse. She asked for one simple favor. Check if any updated trust papers have been filed in the last month. Name's Ayla Langston. The friend hesitated, then said softly, "Not only have they been updated, Maria, they've been replaced." Back in the hospital, Brisket stirred. His ears. Down the hallway, Camille arrived with a printed transcript of the video, her badge from the regional journal clipped to her belt. Ezekiel met her at the front desk. "We release this now, we ruin him." Camille nodded. "Or we wait just long enough for him to bury the rest." Ezekiel handed her a flash drive. "Your call." Camille pocketed it, then glanced at Ayla through the window. The girl slept, briskly curled at her feet, one paw touching the edge of her blanket. Miles away, Marcus poured himself another drink, unaware that the storm he thought had passed was still very much alive and just beginning to change direction. The rain had stopped by midnight, but the air over the Langston estate hung thick with a pressure that hadn't lifted. Marcus stood alone in his office, hands trembling as he zipped shut a black duffel bag stuffed with cash, burner phones, and a fake passport bearing a false name, Darren Hayes. He moved like a man half-awake, driven not by panic but calculation, eyes darting to the digital clock on his desk. 12:17 a.m. He had less than an hour before sunrise, and if his timing was right, he could make it to the Lafayette bus station before the morning crowd. Leona was sedated upstairs. He had slipped a crushed tablet into her wine. Maria, he assumed, was asleep in the guest wing. He was wrong. Maria, in fact, was wide awake, crouched in the hallway shadows, clutching her rosary with one hand and the half-burned will in the other, her heart pounding as she watched him pass silently down the staircase, with that duffel swinging at his side. Marcus reached the garage, disabled the security feed with a remote override, and backed the car out slowly, headlights off. Then, instead of taking the highway, he abandoned the car 2 blocks away and continued on foot. But he didn't notice that Brisket, lying beneath the garden bench by the porch, had risen and followed him silently into the dark. Back at the hospital, Ezekiel jolted awake in the visitor chair outside Ayla's room as his phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. Langston Trust Attorney unreachable. Marcus didn't show for board call. Camille's piece just dropped. His pulse quick. He tapped open the article Camille had published hours earlier, headlined with an embedded video clip of Marcus at the bluff, pushing the wheelchair into nothingness. It had gone viral within 20 minutes, and now, Marcus Langston was trending in the worst way possible. As Ezekiel stood to leave, Brisket's tracker pinged his phone with an alert. Movement detected. Outside perimeter. He checked the signal. It was moving quickly southwest, toward the interstate. He grabbed his coat, called Camille, then the sheriff. Within 10 minutes, units had been mobilized. But it wasn't the cameras or license plates that narrowed the location. It was Brisket. The dog had returned to the estate just long enough to grab an old gym shirt Marcus had discarded the week before. With it in his mouth, he raced back to the edge of the drive and began sniffing east, following a path that led through muddy trails and low fences, across a drainage canal, all the way to the outskirts of the city. When Ezekiel caught up to him near the old railway, Brisket was already panting hard, but still moving, nose to the ground. "What have you got, boy?" Ezekiel murmured, watching as Brisket veered toward a back alley behind a shuttered convenience store. Then came the bark, a sharp, short alert. Ezekiel turned toward the deputy at his side. "Radio the station," he ordered. "He's close." At the Lafayette Greyhound Terminal, Marcus bought a ticket for the 5:40 a.m. outbound to Mississippi. Hood up, collar raised. He kept his head down as he waited in the far corner, glancing occasionally toward the entrance. A bus pulled in, brakes hissing. He stood. Behind him, unnoticed, Brisket entered the station's parking lot, guided by scent and something deeper, A barn forged not just in training but in truth. The dog scanned the crowd, ignoring food wrappers, cigarette butts, and passing taxis. His ears flicked. His nose twitched. Then he stopped. Locked in. Growled inside. Marcus heard it faint at first but rising. A bark. He froze, then tried to walk faster toward the terminal doors, heart hammering. But it was too late. Red and blue lights splashed across the frosted windows. Voices shouted, "Langston, hand!" Brisket exploded through the entrance. Slipping on the tile, claws scraping, eyes blazing. He stopped just feet from Marcus, barking with a force that drowned out every other sound. Marcus turned slowly, face pale, sweat gleaming on his forehead. "You've got no proof," he muttered. But even as he said it, officers moved in from both sides, cuffs ready. Ezekiel entered last, nodding to Brisket, then to the lead detective. "He does," Ezekiel said flatly, holding up the drive. And the hour, the footage of Marcus Langston being escorted through the terminal in handcuffs played on every major local network. In one frame, Brisket stood beside him, not barking, not growling, just watching with unwavering calm, his black and tan silhouette sharp against the flashing lights, like a shadow that had never left his post. The anchorwoman's voiceover carried across living rooms and waiting rooms. The man accused of attempting to murder his own daughter for financial gain was apprehended this morning, thanks in part to a trained service dog whose loyalty may have turned the tide of justice. And at the hospital, Ayla opened her eyes just enough to see the television screen. Her lips moved. "Brisket," she whispered. The courtroom buzzed with hushed voices as journalists, neighbors, and curious onlookers filled the pews beneath the vaulted ceiling, their breath held in quiet anticipation. Natural light poured through the high windows, illuminating the marble floor with a solemn glow, and every creak of the wooden benches echoed like thunder in the silence. At the front, Judge Renner adjusted his glasses, flipping through the final pages of the case file, his expression grave but not unkind. The double doors opened gently at the back of the room, and the sound of wheels rolling over tile broke the momentary stillness. Ayla entered, pushed gently by a nurse, her wheelchair adorned with pale pink ribbons and a small dream catcher dangling from one handle. Her posture was small but composed, hands folded in her lap, dark eyes scanning the room until they landed on the figure seated to the far right, Marcus Langston, cuffed and rigid in a navy blue prison-issued suit, jaw clenched, eyes avoiding hers. Biscuit trotted in just behind her, head held high, the black and tan coat of his back gleaming under the soft overhead lights. He took his place at her side, circling once before lying at her feet, his massive body still but alert, ears pricked, nose twitching each time Marcus's name was mentioned in the murmurs that followed. When Ayla reached the center aisle, the courtroom guard motioned to the technician in the corner. The lights dimmed slightly, and the judge nodded. "Proceed." Camille, seated in the press box, leaned forward as a large projector screen lit up. The first image was simple, a timestamp, the moment before the unthinkable. Then came the video, raw and steady, captured by the small, unblinking lens attached to Brisket's collar. The scene unfolded in silence. Marcus pushed the wheelchair along the bluff trail, Ayla's soft voice asking, "Daddy, why are we here?" Marcus's silence, then his words cold, mechanical. "You're a burden I can no longer carry." And finally, the shove. Gasps rippled through the room. Some turned away. Others stared, transfixed. But Ayla remained still, her eyes not on the screen but on the man who had brought her into the world and then tried to end hers. Marcus shifted in his seat, face reddening, as his voice from the video echoed across the courtroom. Brisket's bark at the end, desperate, enraged, played like a howl through the speakers. When the screen faded to black, silence reigned again. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Langston, would you like to speak?" All eyes turned to her. Ayla glanced down at Brisket, gently stroked the top of his head, then looked up. Her voice was clear, small but unwavering. "I don't know why he did it," she began, "but I know that I'm still here. Not because I'm strong, but because Brisket never gave up. Because people who didn't owe me anything came looking anyway. Mr. Ezekiel, Miss Maya, Miss Maria, Miss Camille. They chose to believe a dog's bark meant something." Brisket's ears perked up as she said his name. She smiled softly and continued, "But I don't hate him. I used to ask why my own dad would want me gone. But someone once told me that hate is just hurt with no place to go. I don't want to carry that. She turned to Marcus now, fully, for the first time. Her gaze didn't shake. You don't get to decide who I become, and I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I won't be like you. I want to grow up like... The room was silent again, but this time it felt different. The kind of stillness that follows something honest. Pure. The judge nodded slowly, turning pages. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's actions were deliberate and sustained over time with motive, premeditation, and intent to defraud. His voice rang out calm and final. Marcus Langston, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without parole for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy to falsify medical records. Marcus didn't speak, didn't move. He stared straight ahead, but not at Isla. Maybe at the floor, maybe at nothing at all. Brisket stood slowly, watching him. Not barking, not growling, just watching, as if saying, I saw what you did, and I never left. The bailiffs approached. Isla turned to Brisket, leaned closer, and whispered, We don't need to run anymore, my hero. The dog licked her hand once, then sat beside her, tall and unmoving. Fall returned to Ridgepoint County with golden leaves and warm cider-scented breezes. And though time passed, memories lingered in quiet details. The soft scrape of Brisket's paws along school hallways, the hum of Ayla's new wheelchair with cherry-colored accents, the proud glint in Ezekiel's eyes each morning when he walked them to the school gate. The courthouse chapter had closed, but what remained was not just freedom, it was possibility. Ayla's recovery continued steadily, with daily sessions of speech therapy, light mobility exercises, and outdoor occupational tasks designed not only to rebuild her strength but to restore her confidence. Brisket became more than a protector. He was her therapy partner, classroom assistant, and gentle motivator who nudged her forward with each small milestone. His title, once unofficial and earned only in silent loyalty, was now stamped in federal ink, the designated emotional support canine level I recognition. The certificate, framed in gold leaf, hung just above Isla's bed, right next to the dream catcher Maria had saved from the hospital. At school, children learned to ask before petting him. Teachers gave him his own water bowl outside the classroom door, and the principal made a quiet exception to every policy the day Isla returned, led by her shadow on 4 legs. Every morning began with Brisket waiting at the base of Ayla's ramp, ears alert, tail wagging, ready to walk beside her like a second heartbeat. His harness carried her books and sometimes tiny sticky notes from classmates with doodles and "We missed you" scribbled in bright ink. When Ayla struggled with balance drills, he steadied her. When nightmares tugged her back into silence, he nudged her hand until her fingers curled into his fur, and the shaking stopped. On the harder days, she'd whisper to him beneath the covers. Voice muffled but full of trust. "We're still writing our story, right?" And he'd lift his head and nuzzle her cheek as if to say, "Always." In October, the town council announced the return of the Community Harvest Festival, the first since the tragedy at the Bluff, and Camille pitched an idea to the organizing board, a closing ceremony called Voices of Hope, honoring local heroes in all forms. Ayla's name was first on the list, not just for surviving, but for standing up, for speaking out. The entire town rallied behind her performance, and soon, preparations turned her days into a blur of dance practices, speech writing, and moments of hesitation Brisket gently pushed her through. Her presentation was to close the festival, a 5-minute routine showcasing adaptive movement therapy set to music, ending with a short monologue. She picked the song herself, one her mother used to hum on rainy days. Brisket was part of it too, trained to move in sync, to sit when she raised her hand, to circle when she leaned forward, and to stand still like a statue when she spoke her final line. The night of the festival arrived under a blanket of stars, strings of light twinkling from oak to oak as the entire town gathered in the open field behind Town Hall. Maria wore her best sweater, Ezekiel brought his old army jacket, and Maya flew in from Denver just to be there, standing in the back, tears already in her eyes. Jack the sheriff watched with his badge polished, and even Judge Renner came, dressed not in robes but in a denim shirt and the warmest expression anyone had ever seen on him. A stage had been built with ramps and soft lights, And when Isla appeared at the edge, spotlight catching the shimmer of her wheelchair, the crowd fell into a hush. Brisket walked beside her, vest fastened, his coat brushed and gleaming under the soft glow. The music began soft, lullaby-like, then swelling into something hopeful. Ayla moved gracefully, arms flowing, turning her chair with practiced ease as Brisket followed each cue without pause. At one point she stopped and he circled her, tail flicking, nose lifting to the crowd. Laughter rippled gently, then faded. As the final note drifted away, Ayla wheeled herself center stage, Brisket sitting proudly at her side. The spotlight narrowed. She took a deep breath and leaned slightly toward the microphone. "This isn't a story about pain," she began. "It's a story about standing up, about being seen, about not giving up even when the world tells you you're small or broken or better off forgotten." Her voice, though young, held the rhythm of someone who had walked through something deeper than most adults ever would. "There was a moment I thought I wouldn't come back from, but someone was there when it mattered. Not a superhero, not a soldier, a dog, a guardian, my best friend." She paused, reaching down to scratch behind Brisket's ear. He leaned into her hand, eyes half closed. "They tried to end our chapter," she said, eyes scanning the audience. "But Brisket and we just turned the page." She took one final breath, then smiled wide and bright. "Brisket," she called out, lifting her hand like a signal. "This is our story." At her cue, Brisket stood tall, raised a paw, and let out a deep, confident bark that echoed across the field like a final line in a book meant to be read over and over. The crowd erupted into applause, some standing, some crying, all clapping not just for the girl or the dog, but for what they had become together. Not a victim and her protector, but survivors, authors, heroes, lights in the dark. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us while telling it, consider liking and subscribing, so you won't miss the next chapter in Stories That Matter. What moment hit you the hardest? Was it the storm rescue, the courtroom scene, or that final line from Ayla on stage? And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one.